Welcome to Restoring Memory, a COVID Calls exploration of the first two COVID years. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters, and since March 16th, 2020, I've been the host of COVID Calls, a daily discussion of the pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. This is episode number 487, March 16th, 2022, an interview with the COVID Calls team. We're going to jump right into the conversation, and I want to introduce everyone to you. Eleanor Mays is completing a Master of Design at the University of California, Berkeley. She's interested in accessibility, sustainability, and fostering equity within design and engineering. She manages the transcription of COVID calls and assists with the rollout of the COVID Calls archive and website. Shivani Patel is a third-year undergraduate student at Drexel University studying finance and economics with a minor in Philadelphia studies. For the past 2 years, she's been working at COVID Calls as a production assistant, helping with scheduling guests and keeping the calendar organized. And Bucky Stanton is a PhD candidate in the Department of Science and Technology Studies at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. His dissertation, Arcadian Pasts and Futures, investigates natural and cultural resource extraction in the Central Peloponnese, exploring the history and politics of archaeology, energy, and modernity in Greece. Well, Bucky, Shivani, Eleanor, welcome to COVID Calls. Welcome back to COVID Calls. Shivani, I think I made an error in introducing you there. What's your minor?
In philosophy.
Okay. It says Philadelphia here, and maybe in my mind I transpose philosophy and Philadelphia, which is that's appropriate.
That's my mistake. I accidentally typed that. It's philosophy. I'm so sorry.
I think we should take that back. And anytime somebody says, "What's your philosophy of life? What's your Philadelphia of life?" I think it works.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, let's start, Shivani. Let me start with you, actually, since we're chatting. Tell us where we know you're in Philly, but tell us a little bit about the COVID situation there, as far as you know it.
Yeah. So right now, everybody is like not wearing, like, the mask mandates and things have gone down. When you go on the subway, when you go to restaurants, even at Drexel University, you're only required to wear masks in a classroom setting. Like if I'm in the residence hall or any common space, nobody's required to wear a mask. So the COVID transmission and everything is definitely reduced compared to what we saw 2 months ago back in January when Omicron was really spiked.
Bucky, where are you?
I'm in Athens, Greece right now, doing a mix of research and writing and remote working and hanging out. And the situation here, COVID-wise, I'm by no means no expert in Greece, but there's not many. I think it's best to review the stats quickly. There's been like 2 to 2.5 million cases. There's been like 26,000 deaths overall. And the country's faced a lot of difficulties, like a lot of places, because of COVID, and there wasn't really a robust government response here, like in America in a lot of ways. Different though, and it's interesting. I have to always explain if I go out somewhere when I show off my American COVID vaccine card, because they have like this government app, and I have to explain in my like broken, shitty Greek that I don't have a QR code. Like, I'm sorry, we don't have a unified system. But in terms of like mask wearing, you go on the street and it's definitely much better percentage or mask hygiene than America. There's still elderly people wearing masks, just like when they walk around. There's still people wearing masks, and you have to wear masks if you go inside. I'm pretty sure there's still a mandate. So yeah, that's kind of the general situation in Athens.
And do you have a sense of kind of the urban-rural divide there? Because you don't do your research usually in Athens, do you?
Well, I do my research related to like the power company here, which is related to the resource extraction in Arcadia, Greece, where my field site is, and there it's definitely different. It's so much more sparse in population that the mask mandate is definitely not the mask mandate. The mask hygiene is definitely lower, especially because it's a big outdoor space. I mean, it's Arcadia. It's where we get the adjective Arcadian for some sort of like pastoral bucolic, harmonious, beautiful place. But still inside there, at least last time I was there, you've got to put a mask on if you're going to go inside. And it's pretty, I don't know what the laws are surrounding it, but it's seems to be like you have to. Like there's no getting around. I feel like in America, some places there's this kind of middle, even earlier in the pandemic, there's this kind of period where you could just, it was like kind of up to you. No one was gonna stop you. It was just kind of like this shame enforced system, and I don't think you can do that here in the same way.
And Eleanor, coming to you, where are you calling from? And same question, how's it looking there?
Yeah, so I'm in Berkeley in the Bay Area in California right now, and things have been trending largely better since the Omicron spike has declined here. Although I do also see a lot of mask wearing still going on, even though the state has stopped requiring it for the end of this month, and or has already stopped requiring it on campuses. So Berkeley waited a few weeks past the state guidelines to allow people to not wear masks indoors, although it's still heavily encouraged. And what I've seen is that it tends to be in graduate classes, everyone's still wearing their mask and practices pretty good mask hygiene. And then in more of the undergrad classes, there's people who choose not to wear it, although not all of them. So there is some hope that people are still following mask wearing indoors. And public transit has been great here in terms of mask wearing, and really has been the entire time I've been here, so since the summer. And so, yeah, we'll see. It'll be very interesting to see. A lot of businesses still have signs on their doors saying masks required, and so it'll be interesting to see how it trails off in terms of mask usage.
Eleanor, let me stay with you for a second, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about your research. I know you all work pretty much COVID calls from sun up to sundown, but you must find some time to do some other work in there somewhere, right?
Yeah, so I'm currently, as you mentioned at the beginning, I'm a Master of Design student at Berkeley. And so when I'm not doing COVID calls, I am working in, we have a disability lab here on campus. Karen Nakamura runs the Rad Mad Disability Lab, where we do lots of cool activist and engineering-based projects centering around disability. And as you probably know, Berkeley has a very much established history in terms of disability activism. And what else? I am an ARCIS Fellow, which is this social justice core fellowship that I got last year that is through the College of Environmental Design, where we focus on issues of social impact and social justice. So a lot of really cool activities going on here. But when I'm not doing that, I'm 3D printing something. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for that. And Shivani, let me ask you the same thing. Tell us a little bit about your, I guess, at Drexel, you do your studies and you also do co-ops. I mean, it's such an engaged curriculum. What do you do when you're not scheduling guests for COVID calls?
Yes, of course. So other than, taking my classes, these past 2 terms, so at my business school, there's a group called the Dean Student Advisory Board, and it kind of gives us a platform to create initiatives and build on these initiatives to on anything that we're really interested. Some students have started a podcast, talking to different professors. Recently, I started building this workshop series about trying to make access to financial literacy knowledge more accessible to students at my school. Mostly because, I grew up in an immigrant family, and then I know also students who come from low-income backgrounds as well. People aren't really taught growing up about, retirement funds or mortgage versus rent, or how to start building credit as a college student. So I got a team of students together, and we're working on adding a interactive element to our workshop series that we're launching next term. And then other than that, next term, I'm also starting my 6-month long co-op, where I'll be working as an investment banking analyst at a local investment bank. And then also, this is one of the more interesting. This is like one of my favorite things I've done this past few terms. I spend my free time going down to the city courthouse to observe trials of public interest because I don't know, there's something exhilarating about sitting in a courtroom for like 4 hours, just observing, a trial, and it's like one of the ways I get to explore my interests as a college student, trying to figure out what I want to do in my career. So those are some of the things I've been doing.
It's a pretty fascinating array of. I mean, you all do such interesting and variable things. Does that mean are you headed to law school? Are you? I mean,
I
somebody who spends 4 hours a day hanging out in a courtroom, it kind of sounds like you're headed to law school.
I'm finding it's one of the topics that I've been finding fun and interesting. Like, obviously learning is supposed to be fun all the time, but this is something that I'm finding to really capture my interest. So it's definitely a possibility. And I am talking to um, different law students and using Drexel's resources to learn as much as I can.
Bucky, same question to you. I mean, you're actually calling us from the field, so to speak, which I totally love the fact that you did actually finally get there to get to work on your field work for your
Oh
dissertation.
my,
Tell us
yeah,
about your work.
that's really hard following the inspiring tale of Shivani going
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
our public
Do you
courtrooms.
spend 4 hours a day sitting in a courtroom in Greece just to practice your Greek and figure out the Greek legal system?
No,
Okay. Shivani, can you work with Bucky a
absolutely
little bit and
not.
get him a little more motivated?
Yeah, for real. But where do I even begin? Yeah, I'm at that stage of late PhD where you did it, you got through your classes, you survived, you made friends, you got too busy. I won a fellowship, and now I'm kind of living in fellowship land. So after like a couple years of just kind of sitting out, making any progress on that thing, humanities and social science, and I guess all PhDs kind of have this idea about the dissertation and stuff. And after years of kind of just having to sit in place and wait to go get it, not knowing if the world would exist, it has been crazy this year to kind of be researching and be in the field. And I've spent a lot of that time mostly in archives, actually, here in Athens. I spent a lot of time in the area of Arcadia previously, working on an archaeological dig at Mount Lycaon. And so I've been doing that historian work and sifting through a lot of documents about the power company, about the development of their kind of coal energy system in the 20th century, and its kind of transformation into today and the politics that are going on in the country here about wind power and how archaeology kind of fits into that. And aside from those things, I'm usually editing COVID calls, or I don't know, retweeting your persistent tweets to let the world know, or answering some sort of email. But also on top of that, I've been rediscovering being a person, I feel like, in the last year after the pandemic, if that makes sense. I know that's kind of like a dark way to put that, but because of that kind of fellowship thing I described, everything was on such pause for so long that this coming, finally doing field work, exploring and being in a place for a long time that's different has reinvigorated my human will to power, or something like that. Similar to the courtroom, but not as cool.
Let me stay with you for a second because I wonder if you can say a little bit more about archaeology. It's actually not a topic that we've covered on COVID calls, but
I was
I
gonna
guess
say,
I don't have a good handle on what countries have the biggest archaeology economies, but I guess Greece must be up there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, just to be topical, to tie it into the whole premise of this 2-year project we've been doing, one of the frustrating things about the pandemic for Greece was that it shut down archaeological sites, especially harshly that first summer. It was really dramatic, and I mean, depending on who you ask and how you count it, and so, it's somewhere between 20 to 40. Some higher estimates going higher than that if you rope tourism together with archaeology and pile it all together. It's a very significant chunk of the economy. So COVID was hugely impactful for that, and probably I think accelerated a lot of the kind of how would you describe this? This kind of the whittling down of local archaeology departments that has happened over the last kind of 15 years or so in and around the Greek debt crisis, which coincided with the Great Recession. But in terms of archaeology and the pandemic a little more, I think about archaeological knowledge production. And so that's a fancy way of saying, how this kind of raw evidence about the past is kind of made. How is it sorted, categorized, transmitted? What's this greater technical system? And how is it related to other technical systems like energy extraction? And being somebody who worked on a dig before the pandemic and then seeing how the system works, you need a system of permits. It's this highly regularized, nationalized kind of service that manages archaeology. The politics of kind of the temporal pausing of the pandemic were very affected archaeology and that kind of production. And because I know so many archaeologists and classicists, as friends, really good friends, I saw them in their lives kind of come to a halt. And the relationship between archaeology and the past and how quick a little fact gets into the words is not this thing that you can really say is very directly, but it was really interesting to see on a personal and structural and systematic level kind of that pausing, that temporal gelling or sticking that happened at that long delay of the pandemic and affected that process.
Is it right that a lot of the archaeology work that's being done is grant driven, so that if somebody loses a year in the field or 2 years in the field, they have some grants get extended, but sometimes funders lose interest.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're talking those kind of dynamics. We're talking about the politics of permit renewal on a provincial level. There's these individual ministries that are called efforts that kind of manage the local provincial level of what excavations are happening, who can go, and whatever. And also, I mean, these are huge pandemic risks. You have a bunch of foreign people all planning to show up, often from multiple countries, in this one country, in a country that isn't necessarily in a power position or doesn't have the wealth to always have the most severe kind of restrictions and technological systems for managing the pandemic. They've done quite well, despite a lot of factors. But with the grant thing, there's also a dynamic of, this is antiquarian operation still in a lot of ways. These digs are cobbled together like everything else in our kind of economy, and they are these kind of, they're grants, they're unpaid labor, they're not unequal but extractive relationships between locals and foreigners. They're weird EU programs and subsidies wrapped together, and then a significant portion is also fundraising from kind of antiquarian enjoyers, people with money and whatever. And I don't know anything for sure, but a lot of the donors that I've known or met before, they were quite old. So I don't know if people might have died in this pandemic, and that might have affected on a structural level, however dark that is.
Let me just take a second here to remind folks that you're listening to COVID Calls, and this is the COVID Calls team call, the long-awaited team call with Shivani Patel, Bucky Stanton, and Eleanor Mays. I'd like to just do a round where we talk a little bit about the work that you do on COVID Calls. And Bucky, I'm going to start with you, since the project started with you, and I still remember where I was standing in my kitchen in Princeton, sort of asking you very naive questions about how does a person do a podcast. And
I was not the person you should have asked.
Well, you were the person I
Like
asked.
I got into podcasts through this. This is how I got through podcasts. Like I was a curmudgeon for years, like especially with like leftist podcasts. I was like,
Well, like
these idiots. And then you called me and I was like, I'm the podcast king. Ask me the questions. Like
you were very convincing, but there's also the sort of generational thing, which is like I know how to use a microphone. I did radio before in college. I did radio, but I'd never made a podcast. And so you were, of course, as you always are, you were upbeat about the idea. You were really full of enthusiasm that we should do it. And I went back and listened to some of the first ones in preparation for this package of 28 episodes that we're doing here over these few days. And we tried a lot of different things at the beginning. I don't know if you remember. I mean, we were on Zoom, we were doing webinar, we were fielding questions coming in. I had my son like making sure that the chat didn't get out of control. He was sitting next to me. We were doing all kinds of I was encouraging people to email me in the middle of the call. I don't know what that was about. I mean, we're just like trying everything. And then we settled on this format. But maybe you could say a little bit about just kind of what you do on COVID calls.
oh, those are great memories because they really were the only movement in my life at the time. I mean, maybe it's just a grad school thing, but I really felt stuck in just the literal temporal mud of waiting and seeing the pandemic and letting my life fold out. So, I mean, really, COVID calls was I needed it, and I still need it in a lot of ways, obviously. But what I do for COVID calls is I sporadically email Shivani and Scott or tweet at them, some insane person that I want to come on COVID calls. Occasionally I come to the group wide meetings and say stuff like we should have anti-vaxxers on, just to have the perspective, just always planting little bombs. And answering emails with like 5 paragraphs, like 700-word essays. But aside from that, my main job is kind of editing together the episodes and kind of just trying to have a good stream because got to have that content mill going and just working. And so that really looked like learning audio engineering just a little bit, just enough to kind of clear things up, do some EQ, know what I'm doing with the compressor, normalizing, occasionally busting out an echo remover, learning about file sizes, acting to you like I knew anything about, how we should set this thing up. But yeah, that's pretty much what I do. But I think my favorite part is listening to all of them.
How long does it take you to edit? So everybody knows. And so Bucky's describing taking what's a live broadcast of an hour, usually, sometimes an hour and 10 minutes, hour 15, and then turning that into an edited audio podcast with music and breaks. And that is attentive, as you said, to clicks and pops and things that drop out and tech glitches and all the normal stuff that goes on when you're producing something. So how long does that take you now? And what's been the learning curve for you?
That's a great question. I do want to say though, in talking about those earlier episodes, I have gone back and tried to like fix some of the audio engineering on them. Some of them are just like not even just before I even figured it out, like even just the most basic stuff. And it makes me cringe. I'm like, oh, are some of those not cringe on my end first, just because it's like, what were you doing? Like you over compressed this, man. Like this, why does Noel sound like he's in a barrel? So I've had those experiences, but on your end too, like you've gotten better at managing guests. Like we used to have an echo problem. Like, like this was, the first like couple months, like we would just have people on, there'd be echoes going on and it maddened me. But to get to your question, sorry, the arc, I mean, at first it took a long time. Like it took hours sometimes just because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I would go on YouTube. I would talk to my audio engineering buddies and like they weren't any help because they were just so far ahead of me. I mean, they're like music guys. So, they're just like EQ to them is nothing. It's like the volume button. It's that simple. But it really took a while before we kind of figured out the machine, as I like to call it, the machinery of COVID calls and how that works. But now it depends, honestly. It used to depend on my knowledge. Now it depends on how much I'm doing on my computer at the time. If that makes sense, because I'm working on a laptop, and I should do the COVID calls on my desktop when I'm in, America, my desktop computer. But I just don't, because it's not my work screen. You got to keep those two screens separate. You got to have a good screen and a bad screen. So this is my bad screen, so that's what I do COVID calls on. But it takes me probably between, to do it well, to like make sure I get all the things, the spaces. Also, the early episodes, there were so many like empty spaces I didn't remove, and I'm like, oh, I should go back and just redo all of them. But to finish up it takes me probably between 30 and 40 minutes if I'm doing it really good. If I'm trying to bust a bunch of them out quickly, at the acceptable and sufficient level, like 25 to 35 minutes, depending on where it is.
That's amazing. And that arc of the learning is, you and I have shared that, as you said, like, and as you've listened to every single episode, and then maybe just only a handful of people who've done that, then you know the rhythms of it, and you know what it's been. And I have to say, I mean, in general, we've had no problems with guests. Guests are great, but sometimes, guests show up with different. Sometimes they're in a room. I'm like, did you choose to be in a cave today? I mean, sometimes it's like really echoing. And then other times that a guest shows up and it's like, just like yesterday, I had John Gorka. I mean, he's a singer-songwriter. He was in a studio, so sometimes it's amazing.
Yeah.
Let
Do
me get
you feel
Shivani
that
in.
people have gotten
Go ahead.
better? Do you feel that people have gotten
Yes.
better? Because I feel like people in the pandemic they've all gotten microphones. They've all gotten better at choosing the room. Like, if they can, like, I totally feel like the sound now, it used to be every episode I was like, all right, what are they? Where are they? How does it possibly sound like this? And now it's like 8 out of 10 guests are just like, I barely need to remove even any noise interference, like any background noise. They all got rigs. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I think everybody pretty well by this point has caught up with the technology if they choose to. Others have said they don't want to, but I think in general that they want to come on a podcast. They at least have done this enough. The sort of ambient Zoom knowledge is enough now that people know what it takes to sound good. Shivani, let me bring you in, and I'm sort of telling stories here a little bit, but I remember the email I got from a dear friend, Jaya Mohan, who works in the Honors College at Drexel, who said, do you have any work for a summer research assistant? And at that time, I had never managed a large team, the research team. And it's not that I didn't want the help of a research assistant. It's just I couldn't process it. I was like, I don't know, I have to like train. Like, how do I do that? Like, it'll be, I don't know how will this work? And I was still trying to figure out what COVID calls was at that point, but we agreed to work together. And you came on for that summer of 2020. And within like 3 days, I was like, there is no COVID calls without Shivani. It was so clear that this was a team enterprise. And I thought about it, in that way from then on. Can you talk a little bit about what you do on COVID calls?
Yes, of course. And yeah, I remember that very clear as day as well. I was a freshman. I had no idea. It was like a learning arc for me as well, because I came on not really knowing much about podcasts, and now I've got a good idea working on it with a team of them. But I started off with mostly helping with transcribing the beginning episodes. And then during the summer of 2020, as a part of my summer research program, I also helped to set up that 1 week in August, I believe it was like a week with like episodes about education, talking to teachers and professors and students and things like that. And then more recently, after the summer of 2020, my work has kind of phased more so into just like reaching out to guests, scheduling guests, maintaining the calendar, and also just organizing all the different guest requests I'm getting, because I get emails from Scott, I get Twitter DMs from Bucky, I get messages on WhatsApp, and before I used to be on just iMessage. But in terms of my learning arc, I started off with just doing all of my action items all just organized in my email inbox, and I just have to, like, go through every inbox and just see, like, "Okay, I see a message from Scott here, invite this person, invite that person, invite this person." But now, more recently, I had g well, not recently, like, for a year now, I've been, using a Excel tracker and just using that to know what the status of each of my invites are. And then also maintaining and cleaning up a Google Calendar every time there's an update. So that's mostly been the nature of my work with COVID calls.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize that so you've done basically almost every part of it, and you've done program development. I mean, you were a host. We did these amazing episodes with educators, which we then came back and had them back a year later. So it's one of those
Yeah.
great arcs of the within COVID calls. And then you did so many of these, like you would sort of contact me and say, hey, what about the issue of air travel, or what about the issue of education or sports? And quite often my answer, I think, would be something like, that sounds good. And then you would go off and do research on how we would think about a call. And most of those turned into episodes. So I think, your eye for interesting topics and your ability to sort of pull those together into guests, actually, that's quite a lot of work, actually, to find those guests and then to get them on. You're brilliant at that. And I mean, I tell this story a lot about Shivani, which is that you at one point explained to me your philosophy of invitation, which is you invite a guest. By the way, you have a much higher acceptance rate than I do, because I stopped doing that at some point because you were just so much better at it than I am. And when somebody says no, your response to them is always, well, we'll come back to you soon when you have more time, or some variant of that. It's a true improviser's philosophy. It's a yes, and we'll talk to you next time. And you've done that with some guests that we didn't land, for example, like Werner Herzog or David Lynch, or Barack Obama. I'm not giving up. Tony Fauci. How many times have you written to Tony Fauci?
At least 5 or 6 times.
Dr. Fauci, you're going to receive another invitation, I promise you.
Yeah.
But it's really appropriate to COVID times, because this has been multiple pandemics. And we have seen sometimes guests who just don't have time at one time, but they'll express back to you, ask me again. And you do, and you always remember to. I also just love, sometimes you forwarded me some of the rejections. Werner Herzog is the best, because I can hear his voice. And I think the line was, Werner Herzog would not like to do the podcast. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
I'm not going to do a Herzog impression, although I do a good one. But yeah, that's amazing. Let me bring Eleanor in, and then we'll talk in a minute about episodes that you all like. But Eleanor, you came in the spring of 2021 when the task had changed and we really had started talking very seriously about making a digital archive. And I think I really, really, I didn't lie to you, but I didn't understand the scale of it.
I don't think that any of us understood the scale of this going in. I mean, not only has the scale of the pandemic changed drastically the whole time we've been working on this, but the amount of ideas and kind of interesting directions that we've explored taking this podcast and archive in have also exponentially grown since we started things. And as I keep reminding you, I am fully enjoying myself and this process. And so let there be plenty more avenues to pursue. Well, I've gotten better at shooting you down on a few of them.
So we get it into the record and into our discussion. What specific things go into the kind of work you're doing right now for COVID calls?
Sure. So I kind of took over where Shivani left off with managing the transcription side of things. So in case anyone doesn't know, we have kind of the basis of our transcriptions from our audio is through an artificial intelligence, the Otter AI system, where that kind of generates like bare bones of the transcript, but with lots of errors and with the vast array of interesting topics we've had on COVID calls, a great many mistakes in terms of proper nouns and names and places and things. And so because we're creating this archive, that really needs to be corrected. And so it's all about sending in a team of transcribers to listen and correct those things in the transcript so that we're making sure we have a accurate historical record going forward. And so I have my little legion of transcribers frantically working to keep up with each new episode. And then there's the processing of those transcripts so that they can both be used on the website as a PDF for people to reference and search through later on, but also as an update to the captions for the YouTube videos that we post, since the auto-generated captions are pretty lacking. So it's great to take that transcript and both have an updated caption on YouTube videos, but also have this searchable encyclopedia of past episodes on our website and on our archive.
So you've been, and you mentioned the other members of the team who, and we're going to have in a future episode, we're going to have a big team call where everybody who wants to, who's been working on COVID calls, can join. Really starting at various intervals, but really last summer we reached out for people who wanted to do work on COVID calls of different types, describing episodes, like Alex Genia has done, doing transcription cleanup as you're describing. How many people have worked on COVID calls?
Oh my gosh, I think it's north of like 20 people at this point. It's a lot. People have dipped in and out. There's just so many episodes and so many people who are willing to get into this content and listen and engage with it, that yeah, we've had a lot of people come through and help us update our transcript.
Let me say a word about Hyuna Kyum, who's also a core member of the team, and I'm going to have Hyuna on with a group of researchers here at KAIST to talk about the pandemic in South Korea tomorrow. But I wanted to make sure that in the context of this call, we did mention Hyuna, who's been really essential to planning programs which are based in South Korea. And she's actually done live translation in a couple of episodes, which is also really, really exciting. And Eleanor, you also developed episodes, just like Bucky and Shivani. You've been really crucial to feeding ideas for guests. And then you were host as well. What was that like?
Yes, I can't believe it's almost like 180 episodes ago now that I helped host, but that just shows you how many episodes there have been. Last summer I helped host for Pride Month, 2 podcast episodes on the LGBTQ community and the pandemic, and so that was really exciting to step onto your side of the microphone, so to speak, and get to kind of bring awareness to how the pandemic is impacting and continues to impact that community. So I've enjoyed times that I've also been co-hosting. It's nice, but it doesn't ever feel good to listen to myself back on the transcripting side of things. But I do enjoy the times I've had to co-host with you.
Quick reminder, you're listening to COVID Calls. I'm talking to Shivani Patel, Eleanor Mays, and Bucky Stanton today. And this is the COVID Calls team, along with Hyuna Kyum, who I'll be talking with tomorrow. And then the extended team, which we will talk with in an upcoming episode. Maybe we could do a round and just talk for a few moments that we have left here about episodes, guests, topics that you found most interesting. I mean, you all are really close to this material. Hardest ones to listen to, ones that have stayed with you the most. I'm too close to this. It's an impossible question for me to answer. I will say that there's ones where I get emotional, and they tend to be ones like this, or when I had my dad on, or when I had my brothers and sisters on. And so these episodes mean a lot to me, the ones where we're talking to family and close friends and close members of this team. But I get something out of every call, so it's hard for me. I can't really say ones that are more or less favorite, because they all teach me something. But I'd like to hear from you about this. And Bucky, I want to start with you on this question.
I feel very similarly that I'm so close, and the torrent of content is so. To your credit, Scott, you insane bastard. I really like. I don't know how that he did this so much. So they're coming at me so fast and so much, and they take this kind of I get lost in kind of the waves, if you will. Like I can tell when we're going through kind of like a dramatic wave, or like oh, Scott needs to talk to some artist phase, or like just like I'm just so close to it. But my favorite episodes are the ones that are, I think, closest to you, Scott, because I jokingly call Scott pater, like, which is ancient Greek, and for father, which is like a deep lore cut, because Scott is ultimately the one who convinced me that I shouldn't be an ancient historian, and that was a bad idea, and I should do SDS instead, or something like it. So that's like a deep cut. I don't think I've ever said that publicly, so I don't think Scott even knows that's the reason I do it. So my favorite ones are the ones that are closest to Scott. Your family, your friends, the ones that are your friends. Like recently, you've been doing a lot of ones where like you end the call with like "I love you," and like I get emotional every time. I'm like, "I love you guys too." Like, it's ridiculous.
We love you too, Bucky.
It's ridiculous. But it's just just those
Yeah.
ones. And also, I'm at this PhD level where I'm like every expert. I'm like, you're full of shit. If you're not like if you're an expert, like if you're an activist, I'm like, oh, rock on. You're like Scott's grandmom or stepmother. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. Let me listen to this full episode. And then it's like, oh, a historian who knows about the 15th century Black Plague, whatever. That's how my mind goes, which is interesting considering like who I am, what I read, and what I say. And you wouldn't think that would be my approach, but because it's you, that's how I feel. And in terms of like hardest app, and then most
Monica
uplifting.
Green, I'm sure, is listening. She's 15th century Black Plague historian, and she's going to call you out on that. And I know you.
I know. I'm kidding, though.
And I know you love Monica's work because we've talked about it. So, Monica, Bucky's just winded you up.
I'm full of shit as always, though, because like I love those episodes too. It's just the ones that I kind of mean, just like the ones that cut through my frontal cortex and speak to my like emotional lizard brain or whatever. Well, I guess that's not emotional, but whatever. That's a stupid idea. But and I'll really quickly, just like the hardest eps, I think, are the ones that are either talking about just like the total structural and systematic failure and the impact on just the individual psychosocial complexes of our society and us, and just like how it's exacerbated everything. Those weigh on me, I think, just because I'm in the field, I'm doing research, and I'm just in that like modernity systems are always breaking people in half kind of headspace a lot. And for most uplifting, I think it's the ones with people who lost someone really close, but seemingly have done so much in reply, even if it's just live their lives, or just thrive where they are, or start an organization. Because I felt so negative so many times in this pandemic, that kind of shit, it's really uplifting. I took way too much time. I'm sorry, Eleanor.
No, it's not too much time. I appreciate that. And Shivani, I'd like to hear from you kind of the same question. Which ones have stuck for you?
I think the one that I felt the most joy from watching is, this is like personally kind of one of the more difficult things I've done while working with COVID calls, is inviting like the whole Congress, members of Congress invites. So my most favorite episode would definitely be that half an hour that we got with Senator Bob Casey, because he's the senator of Pennsylvania where I live. So it was, first of all, a pain in the butt to like, I don't mean it like that. I mean, like, it just took so much effort. So it was really sweet to see the fruit of all those efforts, basically, especially with those Congress episodes. So in terms of like my favorite episodes, the Congress episodes were very like sweet to see, as in like the fruit of my efforts. But one of the questions you had actually emailed to us was about, sorry, I don't want to take up Eleanor's time, but just really quickly, it was about, what do you wish you had seen more of on COVID calls? And I think it would have been cool to have things about like how has the pandemic impacted the legal system, or not just in the United States, but like in different countries, because I know like a lot of Scandinavian countries are like known for their phenomenal justice systems, and I think it would have been cool to touch a little bit more on that. That can still happen, obviously, but yeah, I did want to mention that.
Yeah, and the episodes that you did, Shivani, I mean, you had a former teacher of
Oh
yours
yeah.
on there. That must have been special.
That was very special, because she was my AP government teacher in high school, and I learned a lot from her. So it was really cool to see her on with, it was cool to have multiple role models on one call, including you, Scott.
Those were great calls.
Yes.
And to hear your former teacher praise you in the call as they were also describing how hard it was to be a teacher in the middle of the pandemic was like one of those moments I'll never forget.
Oh yeah.
In COVID
absolutely.
calls. Yeah. I just have to, this is just, I've said it before in the record, I'm gonna say it again. I asked if Shivani would invite every member of the United States Congress to COVID calls. And she figured out how to do it, and she did it, and it took her 2 months. And we still have a list of people who never said no, and she still is working that list. And so members of the House and Senate and staffers who are listening, once this archive goes live, you're going to want to join us, because you'll be able to have a bigger picture of what your boss would be participating in. So we're not giving up on those invitations, but you managed to get Senator Casey to come on. We had Nikema Williams, and other members of the House who actually took the time to come on. Those were amazing calls.
Yes.
Well done.
Thank you.
Eleanor, let me hand it off to you. We got a couple of minutes left before we wrap up. You've also been immersed in the calls at every level, sort of programming, editing, helping other people work through them in the transcripts. Which ones have been important to you?
Oddly enough, it's not the ones I would have expected coming into it based on my interests and other things, but really the whole series of pandemic influences on Louisiana and Cancer Alley have been the ones that have stuck with me the most. And I don't know if that's because I've chatted with other people in the College of Environmental Design about the impact of existing pollution from the petroleum industry and how that is in kind of conflict and crosswinds with the pandemic. But yeah, the Cancer Alley episodes have really, really stuck with me because I really did not have any idea about that before listening, and I keep seeing it come up in all sorts of conversations and ways since starting here. So yeah, those have really stuck with me, and I feel so pleased that I've had all this experience and gotten to work with you all on COVID calls. I'm actually a teaching assistant this semester for upper level undergraduate class that's focused on eugenics in California and in Berkeley, and their final project, or their semester long project, is a podcast, and so a podcast episode. So it's been great to kind of apply all my skills from this end of things to helping these students do research and construct podcast episodes. So it's a lot of transferable skills.
I can only imagine what goes on in your mind when a student says, "Oh, how do you make a podcast episode?" And it's like, like going back through all of the work that goes into COVID calls. I hope you don't tell them everything all at once. It might scare them away.
I know they've I've been feeding them breadcrumbs, so they're not overwhelmed yet.
Right. Well, I'm really glad we could have this call, and we will in the next probably 24 to 36 hours. The site, I think, will probably go live, and so in some ways, there've been various plateaus for this project. That's going to be a big one, and I think new people are going to find this project. And what they will not know until they watch this episode is that behind every single one of those calls, that just looks like a slightly disheveled college professor talking to other experts, that there's a team of people behind the scenes who are just brilliant. and who are dedicated and full of heart, full of ideas. And I really mean this. There is no COVID calls without the team. It would just be a ragtag collection of videos out there on the internet. And you helped make this something real in terms of the content and the technology and the delivery and the promotions and just your enthusiasm that's kept me going at lots of times when getting up and doing this again seemed hard. There's also the group dynamic. Like, Bucky needs something to do this afternoon, right? I better get an episode done so he has something to edit. And Shivani has invited all these people. I can't, we got to keep going. And now, Eleanor, in these last months, your dedication to getting the website done is just, I cannot say enough about how many times you have excused my lateness and been just a source of energy and enthusiasm and excitement about this project. So thanks are not sufficient, but for now they'll have to do until we can all be together in person and have a meal together and talk some more. So I care about each of you very much, and I want to thank you for all the work you do on COVID calls.
It's been fantastic working for you, Scott. It's been amazing.
Yeah, and for the record, like, you do pay us, I would do it for free, but you do pay us. Like, I was signed up to do it for free,
not enough.
Conceptually from the start, but he does pay us, everybody. So, I feel like it's a good deal. It's a good deal.
You gotta stop being surprised that we want to keep working for you. I don't know what that's thinking, Scott.
Well, I appreciate it. And I appreciate each of you. And we'll stop there, just reminding folks that you've been listening to COVID Calls, and this is part of the Restoring Memory set of episodes. And this is the COVID Calls team call. And just again, Hyuna Kim is missing from this call, but you'll get to hear from her tomorrow on the COVID Calls Korea episode. And I want to thank again Shivani Patel, Bucky Stanton, and Eleanor Mays for taking time to have this call. And for everything you do. And we will be, as usual, in contact probably within the next few minutes about something else related to COVID Calls. So I'll talk to you all very soon. Thanks, everybody. Stay healthy, and we'll see you next time on COVID Calls.
All right.